Okay, let's just dive straight in. The United States and Greenland. It sounds like the premise for some kind of, I don't know, alternate history novel, but this is the single most escalating geopolitical story of the moment.
It really is. We're looking at a situation where the president is expressing just, well, absolute confidence that the U.S. and NATO will reach an agreement.
An agreement to acquire the island.
Not essentially acquire the island, yes, but he's refusing to say what lengths he's willing to go to.
And that ambiguity is what's creating all the tension, right?
Precisely. It's not just words. The economic pressure is already there. It's visible. And the response from Europe has been immediate and incredibly sharp.
They're calling the threats a mistake.
More than that, they aren't just putting out press releases. Germany has now joined France in preparing what they are literally calling a trade bazooka.
A trade bazooka. That is not a subtle term. It sounds like something from a video game, not, international diplomacy.
Well, it's a massive readiness plan. It's designed specifically to retaliate against potential tariffs the U.S. could use to force this deal through.
So they're loading their guns.
They are preloading their economic artillery, yes. They're signaling they're ready for a full-blown trade war over this.
So let's just unpack this a bit. The rhetoric is one thing, but what about the actual military posture? Is the Pentagon gearing up for an invasion?
Right.
Because that's the fear you see online.
Yeah, and that's a critical distinction to make right away. The Pentagon has not been directed to plan a physical invasion of Greenland. That is not happening.
Okay.
The military leadership isn't drawing up landing zones or anything like that. But that doesn't mean the military map isn't changing.
How so?
At the same time all these threats are happening, the U.S. is actually reducing its footprint in Europe. We're seeing a cut of about 200 military personnel from NATO and advisory roles.
Wow. So you push for territory while pulling back support from the very alliance that protects that region.
It sends a massive signal.
And I have to imagine there is one specific global player just watching this rift with a huge amount of satisfaction.
Russia. Without a doubt, Russia is openly cheering this on. They're framing the U.S. push for Greenland as a huge blow to NATO unity.
Of course.
And they're even explicitly likening it to their own annexation of Crimea, essentially saying, see, the U.S. plays by the same rules we do. It gives them a rhetorical shield.
And while the big powers are focused on Greenland, there's real collateral damage happening. We saw a huge initiative for Ukraine just, completely evaporate?
That's the tragedy in all of this. There was an $800 billion Ukraine prosperity plan set to be announced at Davos, a major lifeline.
And now?
Completely derailed by the Greenland tensions. The transatlantic partners are too busy threatening each other with tariffs to coordinate on Ukraine.
So Ukraine pays the price. And at the same time, the situation in Iran is also getting worse.
Exactly. The administration is pushing for decisive military strikes on Iran. This is happening while there's a crackdown on protests inside Iran, and it coincides with a U.S. force buildup in the region.
So a pullback in Europe, a push in the Arctic, and an escalation in the Middle East.
It is an incredibly complex, multi-front pressure cooker.
And that pressure, it's not staying in geopolitics. It is spilling right over into the financial markets. U.S. markets just had their worst days since October. And the trigger, it wasn't just Greenland. It was Japan.
This is where it gets really interesting for, anyone watching their retirement accounts. We're seeing major volatility in Japanese government bonds, JGBs.
They're usually the most boring asset on the planet.
The definition of boring. They're supposed to be stable, predictable, frankly, uninteresting. But right now, they're acting incredibly erratic.
Why? What's going on?
The players have changed. Domestic participation in the Japanese market is shrinking, so this volatility, it's being fueled almost entirely by foreign investors.
Yeah.
They're moving money in and out so fast, creating these huge swings because they don't have that long-term commitment that Japanese banks usually do.
Okay, but connect the dots for me. Why does a bond market swing in Tokyo cause a huge sell-off on Wall Street?
It all comes down to something called spillover risk. Citigroup just put out a major warning about this. You have to understand how these big risk parity funds work.
Right.
They're huge funds that balance portfolios based on volatility. They hold risky things like stocks and safe things like bonds. The stability of the bonds is meant to offset the risk of the stocks.
So the bonds are the anchor.
Exactly. But when Japanese bonds, a supposedly safe anchor, start getting volatile, the mathematical models these funds use start flashing bright red lights. And to rebalance the risk, the models force them to sell other assets. And Citigroup is warning this could force these funds to dump up to $130 billion in U.S. bonds.
$130 billion. That's a massive liquidation.
It's huge. And when you dump that many bonds, prices crash, yields spike. And when yields spike, it spooks the stock market. It's a mechanical chain reaction that starts in Tokyo.
And the Japanese government seems torn on how to deal with it.
Completely. You have the finance minister, Katayama, just urging everyone to stay calm. He's talking about tax cuts, trying to soothe the market. But then the opposition leader, Tamaki, is demanding decisive action now to curb the moves.
Meanwhile, back in the U.S., bank stocks are getting hammered for a completely different reason.
Right. This has nothing to do with global bonds. This is a very specific policy deadline coming from the White House on credit cards.
The 10% cap on interest rates.
That's the one. There's an approaching deadline for it. And to put it simply, banks make a fortune on credit card interest 20%, sometimes more. If you cap that at 10%, you are slashing a massive revenue stream.
So investors are getting out ahead of it.
They're selling off bank stocks because they see a huge hit to profitability coming down the pike.
All right, let's shift to Washington. It feels like the executive branch is in a fight with, well, pretty much everyone. The Fed, Congress, even members of its own party.
The fight with the Federal Reserve is probably the most institutionally dangerous. We have Supreme Court arguments starting now over the president's attempt to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook.
Which is a huge test of the Fed's independence.
A test we haven't seen in decades. I mean, the whole point of the Fed is that it's independent, so it can make tough economic calls without worrying about elections.
And it's not just Cook. Senators Warren and Durbin are going after Fed Chair Powell.
They're demanding records related to a Justice Department probe into Powell himself. So the entire leadership of the Fed is under siege from multiple angles.
And while that's happening, there's a new executive order on housing that's shaking things up.
Yeah, this is the one that curbs large institutional investors from buying up single-family homes.
The stated goal is to boost affordability for, regular people.
That's the idea. Stop the big hedge funds from buying starter homes so that families have a better chance. But the implementation, that is going to be incredibly complex and likely tied up in court immediately.
And the political parties themselves seem to be fracturing. It's not just Democrats versus Republicans anymore.
No, it's Republicans versus Republicans and Democrats versus Democrats. The GOP fracture is clear in Louisiana, where the president is backing a challenger against the incumbent Republican Senator Cassidy.
A sitting president trying to unseat a senator from his own party.
It shows deep internal divisions, and on the Democratic side, they're completely torn over a DHS funding bill.
But this is after that ICE shooting, right?
Yes, and it's inflamed everything. One wing of the party is demanding strict oversight of ICE, but the other wing is terrified of looking weak on border security, so they're just paralyzed.
And to top it all off, the investigations. The House GOP rejected an offer from Bill Clinton to be interviewed about Epstein.
They rejected it. They're not taking the interview. They're moving straight to a contempt vote.
Which suggests it's more about politics than facts.
It certainly seems that way. And at the same time, the U.S. has subpoenaed leaders in Minnesota for a criminal grand jury probe regarding opposition.
Opposition. That's the actual word in the subpoena.
That is the word. It is vague, but incredibly ominous. It suggests using the justice system to investigate political dissent at the state level.
Let's pivot to the corporate world. I have to say, my favorite story of the week is about Amazon.
Oh, the irony is deep with that one.
The company that killed the big box store is now, what? Becoming one?
They are launching their largest ever physical megastore outside Chicago. After 2 decades of teaching us to shop from our couches, they're jumping into brick-and-mortar competition head-on.
So they think online growth has peaked.
It signals they need a physical footprint to keep dominating the retail market.
And while Amazon's building stores, Lululemon is having a bit of a PR disaster.
The Get Low leggings, they had to pull them from online sales in North America. The reason? Complaints that the fabric is see-through.
That's pretty much the one thing leggings are not supposed to do.
Exactly. For a premium brand with premium prices, a quality control failure that big is a huge deal. It really shakes consumer confidence.
Okay, let's touch on big tech, Netflix and Meta.
Netflix gave some pretty underwhelming guidance. They're telling investors, we have to spend more money on new shows. The competition is so intense, they just have to keep burning cash.